On a sunny day in Manhattan, a billionaire's world is shaken when his daughter vanishes during a phone call. Found by a brave 9-year-old homeless boy, what begins as a rescue turns into something far deeper, a story of redemption, unexpected family, and the kind of love money can't buy. Before we begin, leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from so we can say hello. Now let's get into the story. Grant Ellison was the kind of man headlines loved. At just 41, he had built a global empire in real estate and tech, a self-made billionaire with a net worth that climbed higher every quarter. His image graced magazine covers and business school lectures like a symbol of calculated success. From his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, Grant orchestrated deals worth millions. With a single call, his voice calm, unwavering, and always one step ahead. But behind the sharp suits and towering confidence was a man trying to fill a different kind of void. Every morning, he takes his 6-year-old daughter Lisa to school, carefully adjusting the pink ribbon in her hair and reminding her to be brave. She is his support, his reason. After his wife died in a tragic traffic accident 3 years ago, Grant buried himself in work, using progress to forget the pain. Lisa's laughter is the only thing that softens the dark corners of his cruel world. Still, his life remained divided, one half power, the other half parenthood. And balancing them was never easy. His assistants knew to never interrupt the hour he dedicated to Lisa after school. But even with the rules in place, the world never stopped calling. On the outside, Grant Ellison was untouchable. But inside, he was just a man who feared losing the last part of his wife. He still had Lisa. And yet it would only take one distracted moment for that fear to come crashing into reality. The late morning sunlight filtered through the trees of Central Park, casting golden shadows across the winding path. Grant Ellison adjusted his sunglasses and looked down at his little girl who was hopping beside him. She had her mother's blonde hair that bounced with every step she took, and she clutched a well-worn but much-loved doll that had been her mother's last birthday present to her on her 3rd birthday. The doll's dress was frayed at the edges and one eye no longer blinked, but Lisa held it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And to her it was. Every Saturday morning it was their ritual. In the park, hand in hand. The chaos of the city melted away on these walks. No board meetings, no headlines, just the soft cadence of his footsteps and the sound of his daughter's voice as she pointed out birds, flowers, and passing dogs. This was the 1 hour of the week where Grant wasn't a billionaire or a CEO, he was just dad. But even during moments like these, the weight of his world crept in. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Not now, not during Lisa time. She turned to him with a proud smile, holding the doll up. "Look, Daddy, she's walking too." Grant chuckled softly, his heart tugging with affection. "She sure is." The sun warmed his back, and for a moment everything felt right. He had money power, a city that bent to his will, but none of it mattered more than the tiny fingers wrapped around his. Lisa glanced up at him with eyes that mirrored her mother's. He saw in them not only love, but trust. A fragile trust that she was safe in his world. He couldn't have known then how close he was to breaking that trust. As they turned down a shady path near a pond, Grant's phone started ringing again, this time, in the urgent tone that only his company's emergency line used. Grant glanced at the screen. Urgent Singapore contract. His brow tensed. For a moment, he hesitated. Lisa was just a few steps ahead, crouched by the grass, watching ducks, with the intensity only a child could give. Her doll rested in her lap, its worn head peeking out from behind her arms. She looked completely absorbed, completely safe. Still, Grant's instincts, honed by years of navigating billion-dollar deals, kicked in. A contract delay with the Singapore expansion could cost him weeks, maybe more. He stepped aside just off the main path and pressed the phone to his ear. "Ellison here," he said, voice already sliding into that colder, firmer tone reserved for boardrooms and crisis control. Lisa, hearing her father's voice fade into business, didn't even look back. She had wandered to the edge of the path, fascinated by a line of ants marching through the grass. The world around her was a wonderland. Her father's presence was her safety net, one she never thought would fail her. Meanwhile, Grant paced slowly in a tight circle, frowning as updates flew in through his earpiece. A misfiled licensing agreement, a shipment held at customs, layers of red tape unraveling, weeks of preparation. His mind spun through solutions, his tone clipped and controlled. What he didn't see, what no one else saw, was Lisa's light footsteps. Step by step, she moved further away from him, mesmerized by a butterfly with yellow wings. She followed fearlessly, the doll bouncing in her hands. On the call, Grant's voice rose. If the documents aren't recertified by midnight, we'll lose the East Tower bid entirely. Just 20 feet away, Lisa stood now at the curb of a busy crossing alone. And Grant, lost in figures, deadlines, and the illusion of control, didn't notice that the most important part of his world had quietly slipped out of reach. Lisa's small feet padded along the uneven sidewalk, her light sandals making soft slaps against the warm concrete. She clutched her doll to her chest, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. The noise of the city surrounded her, buses hissing to a stop, distant sirens, the murmur of 1,000 strangers. But to Lisa, it all faded beneath the excitement of discovery. A pigeon fluttered nearby, wings catching the sunlight, and Lisa followed it instinctively. Her doll's faded pink dress dragged slightly along the ground as she chased the bird's path, giggling. She had no idea her father was no longer within reach. Children didn't measure distance the way adults did. To Lisa, she was just exploring, just playing. The world felt big, yes, but never dangerous. Daddy was always there. He had always been there. But now, with each distracted step, she was slipping further into a part of the city that pulsed faster, louder, rougher. No one stopped her. People passed by, a woman on her phone, a jogger with earbuds, and a couple arguing over a map. But no one noticed the small girl weaving between them, her head barely reaching their waistlines. She was just another child in a crowd too busy to care. At a corner, Lisa paused. The pigeon had flown away, but something else caught her attention, a window filled with teddy bears of all sizes. She pressed her nose to the glass, eyes wide. "Mommy would love these," she whispered to her doll, brushing its matted hair. Behind her, a traffic light turned green. Cars rolled forward with impatient honks. The curb was only a step behind her now. And still, Lisa was alone, no hand to pull her back, no voice to call her name. She looked down at her doll and smiled. "Let's find more birds," she said softly, then turned across the street. Unaware of the van turning the corner fast and low, from the base of a rusted lamppost, a boy watched the world without being seen. His name was Jake, 9 years old, thin as a wire, with skin sun-darkened from long days on the street. His clothes were a patchwork of survival, hoodie too big for his frame, jeans stained from weeks of wear, and no shoes. Just bare feet, calloused and weathered like someone 3 times his age. Jake had been sitting on the corner since dawn, hoping for a kind stranger with $1 or a leftover sandwich. But kindness was rare in this part of the city. Most people passed him like fog, something to ignore, something to forget. He was used to being invisible. And yet Jake saw everything. His eyes tracked people like a hawk who was distracted, who looked rich, who might toss him a granola bar. But that morning, something felt different. His stomach grumbled, but his gaze was fixed on a small girl wandering across the sidewalk too far from the suited man she'd been walking with. She didn't look like the kids Jake usually saw in this neighborhood. Her blonde hair gleamed in the sunlight. Her dress looked like something from a storybook. And in her arms, she held a doll like it was treasure. She shouldn't have been alone. Jake shifted forward, his instincts prickling. He didn't know her name, but he knew trouble when he saw it. The girl was drifting toward the road, her back to the traffic, her eyes on something across the street. Then he heard it, the low growl of a van engine turning the corner too fast. He saw the driver glance down at a phone, not even noticing the child inches from the curb. Jake didn't think. He moved. One moment he was a shadow, the next a streak of motion. He ran barefoot over broken concrete, ignoring the pain, the fear, the weight of everything he'd lived through. Only one thought pulsed through his chest: get to her in time. The van came fast, too fast for a narrow city street. Its wheels screeched as it turned the corner bumper, dipping slightly, with the weight of a late delivery and a distracted driver tapping through his GPS. He didn't see the small figure in the crosswalk. Not until it was almost too late. Lisa had stepped off the curb with innocent certainty, her tiny arms wrapped around her doll. Her eyes were fixed on a colorful balloon floating above a cart across the street. She didn't notice the rumble of the approaching van or the way the world seemed to tense around her. But Jake did. From 10 feet away, his heart exploded into motion. He pushed through the crowd, legs pumping, voice caught in his throat. There was no time to yell, no time to warn her. The moment stretched thin, heartbeat, breath blur. Jake lunged. In one desperate leap, he wrapped an arm around Lisa's waist and yanked her back, tumbling onto the sidewalk just as the van roared past. The gust of wind from the vehicle slapped their faces, and the back tire bumped the edge of the curb where Lisa had stood seconds before. The driver never stopped. For a second, the world went completely silent. Then Lisa burst into sobs, her tiny fingers clutching her doll so tightly it looked like it might break. Jake lay beside her, panting, his chest rising and falling in sharp waves. His knees were scraped, one elbow bleeding, but he didn't care. His eyes went straight to Lisa. "Are you okay?" he asked, breathless. Lisa could only nod through her tears. Jake sat up slowly, watching her with a mixture of relief and awe. He didn't know who she was or why she'd been alone. But something inside him, some instinct honed by surviving too much too soon, had refused to let her become just another name on the evening news. Today he had made a different kind of choice. He had saved her. Jake's arms were still shaking, though the danger had passed. But the sting of the scratches was just beginning. He glanced at Lisa, her face streaked with tears, her cheeks streaked with dust. The doll was crushed between her chest and chin, as if it had absorbed her fear. She looked up at him with confused eyes. "Where's my daddy?" she whispered. Jake swallowed hard. He had no answer. He didn't even know who her father was. All he knew was that she had been alone, and now she wasn't. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I'll help you find him, okay?" Lisa nodded hesitantly, trusting the boy who had appeared out of nowhere and pulled her from the brink. There was something about Jake's voice, gentle but steady, that calmed her more than the chaos around them. In a city that rarely stopped for anything, someone had stopped for her. Jake helped her to her feet, brushing the gravel from her knees with careful hands. His own cuts stung with every movement, but he hid the pain. He couldn't let her see him hurting, not when she was still shaking. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, just scared," she replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Jake gave a nod and looked around. Crowds bustled past, unaware of the miracle that had just happened on the edge of the sidewalk. No police, no family, just strangers wrapped in their own worlds. Lisa clung to her doll and stepped closer to Jake the way a child naturally moves toward safety. "Come on," he said. "Let's go find your dad." With that, the two walked slowly along the curb, one barefoot boy and one lost little girl, bound by a moment that had changed everything. Lisa didn't know his name yet, but in her heart, she already understood something much deeper. This boy had saved her life. Jake and Lisa walked along the tree-lined paths of Central Park, scanning the faces of every man they passed. His heart pounded, not because of fear for himself, but because of the little girl holding his hand. She walked silently beside him, her doll now clutched under her arm, her wide eyes looking from stranger to stranger in hope. "Is that him?" she whispered once, pointing toward a man in a blue blazer across the street. But as they drew closer, the man turned, different hair, different eyes. Lisa looked down, disappointment written all over her face. Jake didn't say anything. He just squeezed her hand. They retraced the winding paths, passing fountains, benches, and vendors selling pretzels. Jake's stomach growled, but he ignored it. He was used to that. What he wasn't used to was the sharp ache in his chest, the pressure of knowing someone else was depending on him. Lisa didn't belong in this world of noise and uncertainty. She belonged in safety, and Jake was determined to bring her back to it. Near the edge of the duck pond, Lisa paused. "This is where we were. Right here." Her voice cracked. He was talking on the phone. Jake turned in slow circles, scanning the area. A group of tourists laughed nearby. A runner zipped past, music blaring in his ears. But no tall man in a tailored suit. No one looking frantic. No father. A frown crossed Jake's face. Why wasn't he here? Suddenly, a voice behind them called out, "Hey, that little girl, what's her name?" Jake turned. A park vendor holding a hot dog cart was pointing. "Someone's been shouting about a missing kid. He said her name's Lisa." Lisa's head snapped up. "That's me." Jake's heart jumped. "Where is he?" The vendor pointed toward the south gate. Security guards walking him down that way now. Jake didn't wait. He grabbed Lisa's hand again and started running, not away from something, but toward the person who had been missing from both of their worlds. For the first time all day, Jake felt hope rush through him like fire. They were close. Lisa was about to go home. At this time, Grant's shoes struck the pavement in quick, anxious steps as he moved through the winding paths of Central Park. His phone call had ended in chaos when he turned to find Lisa gone. 1 second, she had been beside him, humming with her doll in her arms. The next, she was nowhere. His heart hadn't stopped racing since. Panic had gripped him like a vice. He'd searched at every bend, every bench, calling her name with growing desperation. Lisa, Lisa. The world around him blurred faces, voices, the trees, all irrelevant, except for the small, golden-haired girl who had vanished from his reach. Sir, a park security guard had said after a breathless jog up to him, "There's a report. A girl matching your description was spotted near the south path." She's not alone. Hope punched the air from Grant's lungs. "Take me there." As they hurried down the gravel path toward the south gate, a sound cut through the bustle. A cry soft at first but sharp with emotion. "Daddy." It hit Grant like a thunderclap. He stopped. His head whipped around, and then he saw her, Lisa, running her doll, bouncing against her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. Arms outstretched. Behind her, a barefoot boy in ragged clothes tried to keep up. Grant didn't wait. He dropped everything, his phone, his briefcase, and ran. In a moment that made the world fall silent, Lisa crashed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably as he held her tight. Relief and guilt poured over him in equal measure. Grant fell to his knees on the gravel path, arms wrapped tightly around Lisa, as if letting go again would shatter him. She clung to his chest, her doll crushed between them, sobbing into the fabric of his shirt. Her tiny hands gripped his collar like she was afraid he'd disappear all over again. "I'm here, baby," he whispered, his voice choked. "I'm so sorry. I thought you left me," she cried, her voice muffled. "No, baby, never. I was just on the phone." Grant choked on his own words, overwhelmed by the flood of guilt. His voice cracked. "I should have been watching you." Lisa pulled back just enough to look at him. Her face was blotchy, her cheeks streaked with tears, but her eyes were full of trust. "But he was," she whispered, turning to point at the boy standing a few feet away. Jake stood awkwardly at the edge of the path, arms hanging at his sides, unsure whether to approach or disappear into the crowd again. His feet were bleeding from cuts, his jeans torn at the knees, and yet he didn't seem to notice. All that mattered was that Lisa was safe. Grant followed her gaze and rose slowly to his feet, eyes fixed on the boy. He took in the dirt, the thin frame, the weariness behind those guarded eyes. This child, this stranger, had done what security guards, GPS trackers, and wealth couldn't. He had protected her. Grant stepped toward Jake, emotion tightening in his chest. You saved my daughter," he said quietly, almost as if saying it aloud made it more real. "You pulled her from the street." Jake nodded once, unsure what to say. "She was gonna get hit. I couldn't let that happen." Grant knelt down to Jake's level, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know your name." "Jake." "Well, Jake," Grant placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You didn't just help her, you gave her back to me." Jake glanced down, trying to hide the flush rising to his cheeks. But Lisa had already walked back over, slipping her small hand into his. It was her way of saying thank you, and she wasn't letting go. A few curious onlookers had started to gather nearby, drawn by the sudden reunion, the tearful embrace of the barefoot boy and the well-dressed man crouching on the ground. But none of them spoke. They just watched, sensing something sacred in the moment. Grant stayed beside Jake, his hand still resting on the boy's shoulder. He didn't rush. For the first time in hours, he wasn't thinking about deadlines, contracts, or calls. Only the question he finally had space to ask. "How did you find her?" he asked gently. Jake hesitated, unsure how much to share. But Lisa looked up at him, eyes encouraging, and that gave him the courage to speak. "I saw her walking alone. She was following birds, and a van came around the corner. Fast. She didn't see it. I just ran." He paused, glancing at Lisa, pulled her back right before it hit. When Jake told him about his daughter almost getting hit by a car because of his carelessness, Grant remembered the accident 3 years ago that took away his beloved wife. At that moment, his heart felt like it was being squeezed. Grant's throat tightened. He looked at Jake with renewed awe. "You saved her life." Jake gave a small shrug, the kind that tried to dismiss something big. "I didn't think. I just didn't want her to get hurt." Lisa piped up softly. He wasn't scared, not even a little. Grant's eyes welled up. His daughter, his entire world, was standing here because a boy who had nothing had given everything in a single selfless moment. Grant stared at the boy not just as a hero, but as a child abandoned by the very world he had chosen to protect. The stark contrast burned deep. A millionaire who had almost lost his daughter because of a moment of carelessness. and a boy with nothing but instinct and courage. Lisa leaned closer to Jake and whispered, "You don't have to be alone anymore." And just like that, the story was no longer about a near accident. It was about something far bigger taking shape, something neither Grant nor Jake could yet fully name. Grant didn't mean for it to come out the way it did. He was still shaken, still trying to process the fact that his daughter was alive because of this quiet, ragged boy standing beside her. The adrenaline hadn't faded yet, and his emotions were tangled. Grief, guilt, gratitude, all pressing against each other inside his chest. He looked at Jake, really looked at him this time. The bruises on his shins, the dirt under his fingernails, the hollow way his shoulders slouched as if expecting to be dismissed. And then he asked it, "Where are your parents, son?" Jake didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes went still. The question had been simple, but the weight it carried hit harder than any blow. He swallowed and looked down at his scraped toes. For a moment, he didn't answer. Lisa, standing close, looked up at Jake with curiosity and concern. She didn't understand why that question had made his face go quiet. I don't have any," Jake said, finally a voice low, but steady. "My mom left when I was little. My dad's been gone even longer." Grant felt his breath catch. He hadn't expected the boy to answer. Not like that, not with such blunt truth. "So, where do you stay?" he asked gently this time. Jake shifted on his feet. "Behind the diner on 3rd. There's a space between the dumpsters where the wind doesn't hit so bad." Grant's chest tightened. He looked down at his daughter, clean-fed, dressed in shoes that lit up when she walked, and then back at Jake, who had no shoes at all. "I'm sorry," Grant murmured. Jake shook his head quickly. "Don't be. I'm okay. I get by." But Lisa stepped closer and touched Jake's hand. "You shouldn't have to just get by," she said softly. And in her childlike honesty, she said what Grant hadn't yet found the words for. Something was deeply wrong with the world when a child who had nothing gave so much, and still expected nothing in return. The silence between them stretched for a few seconds, thick, heavy, filled with the weight of things unsaid. Grant looked at Jake, really looked, and felt something shift deep inside him. Not pity, not obligation, something more instinctual, something human. Without a word, Grant took off his suit jacket, the finely tailored navy blazer that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and walked over to Jake. Gently, he placed it around the boy's thin shoulders. It hung awkwardly, far too big, but Jake didn't move. He just stared at the ground, unsure how to react. Lisa's eyes lit up. She recognized what her dad was doing before Jake did. Jake looked up slowly, his voice barely audible. I can't take this." "Yes, you can," Grant said, kneeling in front of him. "You deserve a lot more than just a jacket." Jake's lips pressed together. His pride caught between gratitude and discomfort. No one had ever done something like this for him, not without expecting something in return. He wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with strings. "I didn't do it for a reward," Jake muttered. "I know," Grant said softly. "That's exactly why it matters." Jake looked at him, unsure of what to say. His hands clutched the lapels of the jacket like he was afraid it might be taken back. The warmth of the fabric was a shock to his body, but the warmth of the gesture was an even bigger shock to his heart. Lisa walked over and stood between them, her doll pressed against her chest. She looked from Jake to her father, then back again. "Can we take him with us, Daddy?" she asked. "Just for tonight?" Grant blinked. He hadn't expected the question, but the sincerity in Lisa's eyes, the way she had instinctively embraced the boy who had protected on her, it struck something inside him he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked at Jake, alone, bruised and still standing tall. "Yeah," Grant said finally, voice thick with emotion. "I think we can do that." And just like that, a gesture became a promise. The warmth of the moment still clung to the air, but Grant's mind was already shifting, sharpening. He looked again at Jake, the way the boy subtly winced every time he shifted his weight, how he held his arm close to his side like it hurt to move. His legs were scratched and raw, his bare feet streaked with old bruises and fresh blood from running across unforgiving pavement. Lisa clung to her father's hand with one hand and to Jake's with the other. She didn't say much now. Her adrenaline had passed, replaced by a quiet fatigue. Her doll was tucked under her arm again, her grip less tight, more trusting now. She looked up at Jake every few moments, as if to reassure herself that he was still there. Grant lowered his voice and stepped aside, pulling out his phone. Within seconds, he was speaking to someone in clipped, precise tones. "Yes, the pediatric trauma unit. No, not an ambulance. I'll bring him myself. I want full blood work, x-rays, the works. Yes, yes, I'll cover it. Just make sure they're ready. When he returned to the kids, Jake looked uneasy. What was that about? We're going to take you to get checked out, Grant said gently. A hospital just to make sure you're okay. Jake's eyes widened. I don't need a hospital. I'm fine. You're limping. Your hands are scraped raw. You've been sleeping in alleyways. That's not fine. Jake flinched at the truth of it, but his voice remained defensive. I've had worse, I'm sure you have, Grant said, his voice steady. But you shouldn't have to anymore. Jake looked away, jaw tight. He didn't know how to process this sudden concern from a man like Grant, this shift in his story from forgotten street kid to someone who mattered enough to be cared for. Lisa tugged at Jake's hand, her eyes wide with worry. Please go, she said softly. Just to make sure, Jake sighed. He could handle pain. He'd learned how to ignore hunger, cold fear, but he couldn't ignore Lisa's voice. Okay, he said finally. The black SUV pulled up curbside, sleek and spotless. The driver stepped out immediately and opened the door. Jake froze at the sight of it. The leather seats, the sheer newness of it all. He didn't belong in a vehicle like that. Grant noticed. It's just a ride, Jake. You're not in trouble. You're our guest. Jake climbed in slowly, trying not to leave dirt marks on the seat. Lisa slid in next to him, and the door shut with a soft thud that seemed to cut off the noise of the city. The drive to the hospital was quiet. Lisa leaned against Jake's side, exhaustion setting in. Grant sat opposite them, phone in his hand, but face tilted toward the boy. He noticed every flinch, every wince. Guilt pressed against his ribs. If Jake hadn't acted, if that van had been a second faster, he couldn't even finish the thought. When they arrived, a medical team was already waiting near the private entrance. Grant stepped out first and held the door open. Jake hesitated again. Lisa took his hand. I'll wait right here, she promised. That was enough. Inside, Jake was ushered gently into an exam room. Nurses helped him onto the table, cleaning his cuts and checking his vitals. A doctor came in, a calm woman with warm eyes, and began the evaluation. She asked questions. Jake answered quietly. No allergies, no known conditions, no vaccinations, no medical history at all. Grant stood outside the glass, watching through the one-way panel as doctors peeled back the layers of neglect, bruises that hadn't healed properly, evidence of past fractures that had gone untreated, signs of mild malnutrition. The reality of Jake's life hit harder than anything Grant had expected. It wasn't just that the boy had been brave. He had been surviving a world that had never once stopped to ask if he was okay. An hour later, the doctor stepped out. We've cleaned and bandaged everything. No broken bones this time, but there are signs of older injuries. Some ribs have healed a bit crooked, and he's severely underweight for his age. He needs rest, food, stability. Grant exhaled, slowly nodding, and long-term. She softened. He needs a home, and someone to make sure he doesn't fall through the cracks again. Grant looked through the glass again. Jake was sitting upright now, legs swinging off the table, eyes watching the nurses as they handed him a juice box. He didn't smile, but something in his posture had eased, as if for the first time in a long time, he wasn't bracing for the worst. Lisa sat beside him, her small hand resting on his. She'd refused to stay in the waiting room, and when the nurses had seen how she looked at him, they hadn't argued. When Grant walked back into the room, Jake looked up at him, uncertain. I'm okay, he said quickly. They said I can go. I know, Grant replied, pulling a chair close. But you're not leaving alone. Jake blinked. What do you mean? Grant glanced at Lisa, who nodded eagerly. I mean, Grant said, voice warm but serious. You're coming home with us. And tomorrow we talk about what comes next. For the first time since they met, Jake couldn't find any words. His chest tightened, not from fear, but from the overwhelming possibility that maybe, just maybe, someone really wanted him to stay. Just past sunset, Manhattan glowed in a warm orange haze. Grant Ellison stood by the hospital's private exit, his arm around Lisa's shoulders as they waited for the car to return. Jake stood just beside them, newly bandaged, now wearing clean clothes Grant had arranged through the hospital's emergency closet. Still too large, but they weren't torn, and for the first time in who knew how long, his feet had shoes. The city's evening buzz was in full swing, but none of them noticed the group of teenagers across the street, one of whom had recognized Grant. then spotted Jake and Lisa and instinctively started recording. The billionaire kneeling to help fix the cuff of the boy's pants. Lisa tugging Jake's sleeve and whispering something that made him look down, trying not to smile. Then Lisa hugged him. With no warning, no request. Just wrapped her small arms around Jake's middle and laid her head gently against his chest. Jake froze, not because he didn't want it, but because he wasn't used to it. Not used to being touched like that. Not used to being wanted. The moment was genuine, unplanned, and powerful. And the camera caught it all. The elevator doors slid open with a gentle chime, revealing a sprawling, glass-walled penthouse high above the Manhattan skyline. Jake hesitated at the threshold, his hands still clutching the edge of the jacket Grant had given him. The marble floors gleamed under warm, recessed lighting. Plush rugs, sculpted furniture, art on the walls, a piano by the window. It didn't look like a home, it looked like a dream someone else was living. Lisa stepped out first barefoot, still carrying her doll. She turned back to Jake and grinned. "Come on, you're with us now." Grant motioned for him to follow, then whispered something to the housekeeper, who nodded and disappeared into a side hallway. Jake stepped in cautiously, afraid his muddy shoes might ruin something, even though they had been scrubbed clean at the hospital. Everything smelled like lavender and fresh linen, and for a moment he was certain someone was going to ask him to leave. But no one did. Lisa led him past the grand piano and into the heart of the home, a cozy, sunken living room with a curved sectional sofa and a massive screen built into the wall. She flopped down onto a pile of pillows, motioning for Jake to join her. "You hungry?" she asked. Jake hesitated. "A little?" She grabbed the remote and pointed it toward a touchscreen on the wall. "Daddy has a kitchen button." Before Jake could ask what that meant, Grant walked in with 2 steaming plates and a laugh in his voice. "No kitchen button tonight. I beat you to it." He handed one plate to Jake, macaroni and cheese perfectly golden, next to 2 slices of buttery toast and a few fresh strawberries. Simple, but warm, real. Jake stared down at it like it was a work of art. "You sure I can eat this?" he asked. Grant sat beside him. "Jake, you saved my daughter's life. This is just dinner." Jake gave a nod, trying not to let emotion rise in his throat. He didn't remember the last time someone made food just for him. No charity line, no scraps, just a plate and a seat at a table. Lisa was already digging in, talking between bites about her favorite cartoons, how she once built a rocket ship out of pillows, and how her mom had made the best hot chocolate in the world. She glanced at Jake and said, "I bet you'd like her." Jake smiled softly, unsure how to respond. The mention of her mom had come with no sadness, just love. He wondered what that kind of memory felt like. When dinner was finished, Lisa dragged him down the hallway. "I want to show you something." Jake followed quietly past sleek doors and glowing lights until they stopped at a bedroom. Hers. Stuffed animals lined the shelves. A telescope sat near the window. Stars had been painted across the ceiling. Lisa picked up a small framed photo on her nightstand and handed it to him. It showed her and a woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. They were hugging on a blanket under a tree. The woman looked like Lisa, but older, stronger. "That's Mommy," she whispered. Jake looked at the photo carefully, then handed it back with care. "She looks kind. She was," Lisa said, placing the frame back gently. "She would have liked you." Jake didn't speak. He just nodded, the lump in his throat rising again. "Want to see your room?" she asked brightly. "My room." Jake blinked. Lisa took his hand and pulled him back down the hall, past the living room to a quiet guest room near the back. It was softly lit, with a large bed made up in navy sheets, shelves of books, and even a few board games stacked neatly in the corner. Grant stood in the doorway behind them. "I had it set up just in case," he said. "You don't have to stay if you're not ready, but if you want, it's yours, for as long as you need." Jake stepped in slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the bed. The mattress gave slightly under his touch, soft, supportive, not cold concrete or damp cardboard. He ran his hand over the blanket, half expecting to wake up in the alley behind the diner. "I've never had a room before," he said quietly. "Not really." Lisa climbed up onto the bed and crossed her legs. "Well, now you do, so you better get used to it." Grant chuckled. "We'll give you space. Fresh clothes are in the closet. Bathroom's just down the hall. Lisa has a nightlight if you want one. And if you need anything at all, you just call out." Jake gave a small nod, still stunned. As Grant turned to leave, he paused. "Good night, Jake. And Thank you again. Lisa leaned over and gave Jake a quick hug. Night. They disappeared down the hallway, their voices fading. Jake sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, then slowly lay back, arms spread. The ceiling above was plain white, but to him it looked like a sky he hadn't seen in years. Warm, safe, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Jake fell asleep without fear. By the next morning, the video had gone viral on social media with various headlines attached to it. Billionaire's daughter reunites with her hero, homeless boy from the streets to saving lives. The boy who stopped a truck, a hug that changed everything. Millions watched it on phones and laptops. Some wept. Some donated to shelters. Some searched for Jake's name, wanting to help him directly. Others debated whether Grant's actions were a PR move. But the truth was more intimate, more real than headlines could ever summarize. Inside the Ellison penthouse that same morning, Jake sat at the breakfast bar, blinking at a stack of pancakes bigger than his head. He hadn't eaten this much food in one sitting in years. Lisa was beside him, humming and pouring syrup over both their plates, like it was perfectly normal for a billionaire's daughter to share breakfast with a boy who'd slept behind dumpsters a day ago. Grant scrolled through his phone from the corner of the room. He had barely touched his coffee. His inbox was overflowing with press requests, investment updates, and now charity offers. But the only thing he cared about was the baby now living under his roof and how easily this child had recentered everything. He put the phone down. Jake looked up nervously. Are we in trouble? Because of the video? Grant shook his head and smiled. No, Jake, we're not in trouble. We're just being seen. Lisa turned toward her dad. Is that bad? No, sweetheart, it's not bad at all. Then after a pause, Grant added, sometimes the world needs to see something real. Something good. Later that afternoon, a journalist from a major media outlet reached out not for a sensational headline, but to ask if they could share Jake's story properly. Grant was hesitant. This wasn't about fame, it wasn't about clicks. But then he remembered the doctor's words at the hospital. He needs a home, and someone to make sure he doesn't fall through the cracks again. Maybe Jake's story could be more than just a rescue. Maybe it could be a spark. Grant agreed, but only under one condition. Jake had to want it too. That evening, they sat together on the rooftop balcony. The sun had dipped behind the skyscrapers, and city lights flickered like stars. Jake, Grant began carefully. Someone wants to write about what happened yesterday. About you. Not just the accident, but who you are. What you've been through. Jake leaned on the railing, shoulders hunched. Why? Because people are listening, and maybe your story could help others. Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't want people to think I'm special. I just did what anyone should do. Grant's voice softened. But not everyone does it, Jake. That's what makes you special. Lisa tugged at Jake's hand. If you tell your story, other kids like you might not feel so alone. Jake looked at her, really looked, and the wall he'd spent years building cracked just a little more. He nodded. Okay, he whispered, but I want it to be real. No fancy words, just the truth. 2 days later, the article went live. His name is Jake. It opened not with his poverty, but with his courage. It didn't romanticize his suffering, it honored his strength. And in the center of it all was a photo of the hug, Lisa holding on to him like family, and Jake looking stunned, overwhelmed, and finally seen. Within 24 hours, charities saw spikes in donations. Foster care agencies received calls from families wanting to adopt older children. Teachers in schools read Jake's story aloud. Even Grant's own board of directors paused to ask how the company could do more for community outreach. A single hug had gone viral, but more importantly, it had started something. Back at home, Lisa proudly taped the article to the fridge next to her crayon drawings. This is better than any of Daddy's magazine covers, she told Jake. Jake gave a shy smile. You think so? Lisa nodded. Because you didn't just make money, you saved someone. You saved me. Jake turned away so she wouldn't see his eyes fill. But Grant did. And in that quiet moment, he realized something profound. All the power he'd built, all the influence he'd earned, it had never changed the world like Jake had in a single act of selfless bravery. And that hug, it didn't just go viral, it mattered. The boardroom at Ellison Capital wasn't just a meeting space, it was a monument to power. Polished mahogany table, floor to ceiling windows with views that stretched beyond Manhattan. A sleek digital panel along the wall displayed real-time market fluctuations, acquisitions, and motion contracts waiting for signatures. Every Monday morning, Grant Ellison stood at the head of the table like a general preparing his troops. But today felt different. Today, Grant didn't wear his usual steel gray suit or his expression of unwavering control. He wore something quieter, still sharp, but less armored. His posture was still tall, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. Something softer, human. One by one, the directors filed in. Men and women in tailored suits, each carrying tablets and thick folders, whispering about international deals and the growing storm over the Singapore contract. Some glanced at each other with confusion when they noticed the absence of Grant's assistant, the delay in the usual meeting agenda. He let them settle. Then he stepped forward. I know you're expecting numbers, projections, and a discussion on the East Tower negotiation. He began, voice calm but firm. We'll get to that. But first I need to tell you something. The room quieted. He wasn't reading from notes, wasn't following a pitch deck. Instead, he told them a story about Lisa, about the walk in Central Park, about the call that distracted him, and about a van. The directors sat straighter, unsure where this was going. Then came the turning point. A boy saved my daughter's life, Grant said, his voice catching for a fraction of a second. A 9-year-old boy named Jake. No home, no shoes, no help from anyone. And still, he ran into danger to protect someone he didn't even know. Murmurs rose around the room. Grant stepped closer to the table. I've spent years chasing growth building, wealth perfecting strategies, everything to stay 10 steps ahead. But in one moment, I lost the most important thing in my life because I was too busy, because I assumed I had time. If Jake hadn't been there, he paused. Everyone understood what he didn't say. I brought him home, Grant continued, got him medical care, a safe place to sleep. But that isn't enough, not for him, not for the others like him. I can't go back and undo the mistake, but I can change what we do going forward. The CFO leaned forward, brow furrowed. Are you suggesting a philanthropic division? Grant met his eyes directly. No, I'm suggesting a mission, one that's tied into the core of who we are. We invest in potential, yes, but it's time we invest in people. Kids like Jake are falling through the cracks in every city we build in. That has to matter. Another board member, older, skeptical, tapped her pen against the table. With all due respect, Grant, we're not a nonprofit. No, he said evenly. We're a company that changes landscapes. Why can't we change lives? At the same time, he tapped the tablet in front of him. The screen behind him lit up with new slides, plans for a community impact program, a division focused on youth outreach, housing partnerships, education grants, and emergency care. A new logo appeared on the screen, the Jake Initiative. Gasps rippled through the board. I've already seeded the funding personally, Grant said, and I'll match every dollar contributed by the firm. This isn't about press, it's about responsibility. Silence. Then slowly a hand raised. It was Raj Patel, one of the most financially conservative voices on the board. What you're doing, it's bold and personal. But it's also smart, because if the next Jake doesn't get help before something worse happens, we all lose more than we can afford. A few nods followed. The resistance softened. The woman with the pen looked at Grant softer now. And what about Lisa? Grant exhaled. She was the one who told me Jake shouldn't be alone anymore. If she can see that, then I sure as hell should have seen it sooner, another voice added. And now the world has seen it too. That hug went global. Grant gave a slight smile. It wasn't about going viral. It was about being real. And I'd like this company to be just as real. The room fell quiet again this time, not from discomfort, but from understanding. After a beat, the chairman nodded. Let's move forward, he said. When Grant stepped out of the boardroom, the city was still rushing, deals were still moving, but something inside him had changed permanently. Not just because Lisa was safe, but because for once he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to do something that mattered. And somewhere far above the skyline in a penthouse, where a little girl waited with a doll and a barefoot boy was finally resting in clean sheets, a new story was quietly beginning, one that would outlive stock charts and contracts. It had started with a mistake. It was growing into redemption. The city glimmered beneath the penthouse windows like a blanket of stars fallen to earth. Grant Ellison stood quietly in his study, the amber glow of a desk lamp casting soft shadows across the sleek walnut surface. His phone was in his hand thumb, hovering over a contact he hadn't called in over a year. Not since the last time he adjusted his will. But tonight this call wasn't about wealth management, estate planning, or asset protection. It was about a boy, Jake. Grant took a breath and pressed the name. The line rang twice before a voice answered, smooth and curious. Ellison, I was wondering when I'd hear from you again. What's going on? Grant turned toward the window. The lights of Manhattan reflected faintly in the glass. I need to talk guardianship. A pause. For Lisa, no, he exhaled, heart tight in his chest. For another child. His name is Jake. He's 9. He saved Lisa's life. The attorney's voice sharpened with interest. You want to adopt? Eventually, yes, but right now I need emergency guardianship. I need to make sure that kid never goes back to sleeping behind a dumpster. Ever again. I'll start drawing up the paperwork, the lawyer said without hesitation. Tell me everything. Grant walked slowly back to his desk and sat down. He didn't sugarcoat anything, he told the truth. The streets, the rescue, the hospital, the hug that spread like wildfire through the internet, but more importantly, through his own heart. And the quiet look in Jake's eyes when he said, I just didn't want her to get hurt. That's not a child who needs saving, Grant finished. That's a child who deserves a future. The lawyer's voice softened. We'll file for temporary emergency guardianship first thing in the morning. But Grant, this will draw attention. You're a public figure. I don't care, Grant replied instantly. Let them look. Let them write headlines. He's already part of our family. I'm just making it official. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the skyline. In the quiet kitchen, Jake sat at the counter, quietly flipping through a picture book Lisa had shown him, a half-eaten piece of toast in one hand. His bandages were clean, his eyes clearer. But there was still a certain weight behind his smile, like he was afraid it would all disappear if he got too used to it. Grant poured himself a cup of coffee and took the stool across from him. Sleep okay? He asked. Jake nodded. Yeah, the bed's huge. Grant smiled. Good. You deserve that. Jake looked down at the book, then back up. Am I staying here? I mean, really staying. Grant set down his mug. Jake, I talked to my lawyer last night. I'm filing paperwork to make it official. I want to be your legal guardian. Jake blinked. Like adoption? It's a process, Grant explained gently. But yes, it starts there. The first step is guardianship. It means I'm responsible for you, for your safety, your school, your doctor visits, your birthday parties. Everything. Jake's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The idea seemed too big, too sudden. You really want to do all that for me? Grant leaned forward, steady and calm. You saved Lisa's life, but even before that, Jake, you mattered. You're smart, brave, and kind. You don't have to prove anything to deserve a home. Jake looked away, biting his lip. People say stuff like that sometimes, but they always leave. Grant's heart cracked. He reached out slowly, not forcing the moment, but offering it. I'm not leaving, he said softly. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever if you'll let me stay. Jake stared at him, and then slowly, uncertainly, he nodded. By noon, Grant's legal team was in motion. Petitions were filed under sealed confidentiality. References were gathered, including the pediatrician who treated Jake, a psychologist who'd met with him for an early evaluation, and even a statement from Lisa drawn in her own handwriting with crayons. Jake is my hero. He is my family now. Please let him stay with us forever. When the paralegal scanned the letter, she wiped her eyes and added it to the packet without a word. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, Grant set aside meetings, deferred a speaking engagement, and canceled a high-profile business lunch. None of it mattered more than being present. That afternoon, he took Jake to get fitted for new shoes, real ones, not donations or hand-me-downs. A tailor was called in to measure him for school uniforms. They even stopped by a bookstore where Jake picked out 3 chapter books he was almost too shy to admit he'd been curious about. Lisa, of course, had added 2 coloring books and a pack of glitter pens to the haul. By dinner time, they returned home with shopping bags and tired feet. Grant watched as Jake sat down on the couch, his new sneakers still on, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to take them off. Lisa curled beside him and placed her doll in his lap without saying a word. And for a long time, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. It wasn't about papers or courts or signatures. It was about belonging. And with every small, silent act, Jake was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time it was real. The stars outside the penthouse windows blinked gently in the dark, soft city glow, washing the skyline in shades of silver and navy. Inside, the lights were dimmed, low, casting warm, golden halos across the living room. It was late and the world had finally quieted except for Lisa, who sat cross-legged on the rug with her treasured doll in her lap. Jake had just returned from brushing his teeth, wearing the new pajama set Grant had gotten him that morning, simple gray cotton, warm and clean. He still looked slightly unsure of how to act in a home like this. He kept glancing around as if he might accidentally break something, or worse, wake up and find this was all a dream. Lisa watched him silently, then stood up without a word and walked over to him, her doll clutched to her chest. Jake smiled at her, the kind of gentle, hesitant smile that didn't come easily to him yet. But Lisa didn't smile back. Her face was serious, her eyes wide and soft. Without asking, she held the doll out to him. Jake blinked. "What are you doing?" Lisa stepped closer, pushing the doll gently into his hands. "You need to keep her tonight." Jake's voice faltered. "Lisa, I can't. That's yours." Xiang. "You've had her since she was a gift from Mommy," Lisa whispered, cutting him off. "When I was little, my third birthday." Jake froze his fingers, brushing the soft fabric of the doll's dress. Lisa took a deep breath, her voice barely more than a whisper now. "It's the last thing Mommy gave me before she got really sick. I've always kept her close, because she made me feel safe." Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lisa stepped closer. "She kept me safe when I was sad, when I missed Mommy too much, when I got scared at night." Jake looked down at the doll in his hands. It was worn and soft from years of love. One button eye was scratched. A small patch had been stitched near the shoulder. And yet it radiated something deep, something beyond thread and cloth. A history, a presence. "I want you to have her," Lisa said quietly. Jake shook his head, startled. "Lisa, no, I don't deserve something like this." "Yes, you do," she said firmly, eyes shining. "You saved me. Maybe she helped you find me." Jake felt something twist in his chest. No one had ever trusted him with something so personal before, let alone a child. But Lisa, in her innocence and wisdom, was giving him the most precious thing she had. "Just for tonight," she added, "just to keep you safe." Jake looked at her stunned. "You're not scared without her?" Lisa hesitated, then smiled softly. "Not when I know you're here." The words hit him harder than he expected. Grant stood silently near the hallway, watching from a distance, not wanting to interrupt. He saw the weight of the moment, the vulnerability in Lisa's offering, and the deep ache in Jake's eyes as he held the doll like it might fall apart if he wasn't careful. Jake finally nodded. "Okay, just for tonight." Lisa smiled and took his hand, leading him toward the guest room. The doll rested in the crook of his arm now, and with every step, Jake felt something strange warming inside him, a kind of quiet he hadn't known since before his world fell apart. In the room, Lisa pulled back the blanket and helped Jake get settled. She tucked the edges around him with surprising care, like she'd seen her mother do it 100 times. Jake stared at the ceiling doll, still clutched, close, heart beating fast. Lisa leaned close. "She always worked better if you said goodnight to her," she whispered. Jake turned his head toward her, his eyes glassy. "Good night," he said softly, glancing down at the doll, then added, "Thank you for keeping her safe." Lisa nodded. "Now she'll keep you safe too." She stood ready to go, but hesitated in the doorway. "Jake, yeah, you're the first person I've let hold her since Mommy passed." Jake's voice broke. "I'll take care of her. I promise." Also, Lisa smiled and without another word patted down the hallway. Jake lay still, the city a soft hush beyond the windows. He stared at the doll, then rolled onto his side and held it closer. For the first time in years, the ache of loneliness didn't press down on him like a weight. For the first time, he didn't feel like just a survivor. He felt wanted, protected, maybe even loved. And in the stillness of that night, wrapped in a blanket in a room that finally felt like it belonged to him, Jake whispered the words he hadn't dared to say in years. "Good night, Mom, wherever you are." and with the doll still pressed gently to his chest, he drifted into the deepest, safest sleep of his life. Weeks passed, and the chill of early spring slowly gave way to warmer winds that swept through Manhattan's streets. In the Ellison penthouse, life no longer felt like a chapter paused between crises. It was becoming something steady, something whole. And at the heart of it was a boy who not long ago had been sleeping behind a diner. Jake, no longer barefoot, no longer bracing for the world to turn against him. Now he woke up in clean pajamas in a room that smelled faintly of cedar and sunlight. His name was on a cubby by the door. His backpack hung beside Lisa's, both tagged with small wooden plaques Grant had engraved himself. It wasn't just shelter, it was home. The first day Jake walked into his new school, a private academy, nestled in the Upper West Side, he was dressed in a Navy uniform that actually fit. His shoes were polished. His backpack was filled with supplies he had picked out with Lisa on a Sunday afternoon trip to the bookstore. But more importantly, his heart carried something he'd never had before: belief. Belief that he wasn't just passing through life anymore. He belonged somewhere. Lisa had made it her mission to introduce him to every corner of the school. She dragged him from the science lab to the art room, explaining which teachers gave the best snacks and which playground swings were the fastest in the world. Jake didn't speak much the first few days. Old habits die slow, but Lisa made up for the silence. And soon the other kids began to notice him. Not as the new kid or the boy from the news, but as Jake, the one who read fast, the one who could draw dragons in the margins of his notebook, the one who stood up quietly when someone dropped their tray in the cafeteria and helped them clean it up without a word. He was still adjusting, but every time he glanced across the hallway and saw Lisa grinning at him like he was the best secret the world had to offer, he felt something anchor inside his chest. Grant, meanwhile, took to his new role with a quiet, fierce devotion. He never treated Jake like a guest or a temporary charity case. He showed up at every parent meeting, every school pickup. He made pancakes on Sundays even when they came out lopsided. He taught Jake how to tie a tie, how to swing a golf club, and after a particularly emotional night, how to fold a note and slide it under someone's door when words were too hard to say aloud. That night, Jake had left one for Grant, just 3 words written in pencil. "Thanks for staying." Grant had kept it in his wallet ever since. By the 6th week, Jake had completely integrated into their daily rhythm. He and Lisa now brushed their teeth side by side each night, racing to see who could finish first without leaving toothpaste on the mirror. They fought like siblings over cereal flavors, but always ended breakfast laughing. Lisa insisted they both tuck in the doll every night, now resting peacefully on Jake's bookshelf, a symbol of something deeper than comfort. Trust, family, connection, and Grant. He stopped checking his phone at dinner. His emails waited, deals waited. His family didn't. He sat through Jake's first school presentation, clapping so loudly at the end that the teacher chuckled and asked if Grant wanted to come up and give a speech too. Afterward, Jake smiled a real full smile, the kind that lit up his entire face, the kind of smile that only grows in a place where love has taken root. One evening, Grant took Jake and Lisa out to dinner, not a formal event or business dinner, but a casual meal at a quiet bistro on the Lower East Side. They laughed over pasta. Lisa tried to convince them both that her doll could taste spaghetti. Jake, ever the skeptic, asked for proof. They left the restaurant with ice cream cones and sticky fingers, walking slowly beneath the soft glow of the street lamps. As they neared the car, Jake tugged at Grant's sleeve. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." Jake hesitated. "When the papers go through, when it's official, will I still be Jake?" Grant knelt down to meet him at eye level. "You'll always be Jake. That won't change. But will I be your Jake?" Grant's throat tightened. "You already are." Jake nodded slowly. Then, surprising them both, he stepped forward and hugged Grant without hesitation, his arms wrapping tightly around the man who had become so much more than just a guardian. Lisa jumped in next, sandwiching them into a 3-way hug, giggling as she declared, "We're squishing." Grant laughed, pulling them both closer. In that moment, under the city lights with ice cream dripping down Lisa's chin and Jake's arms wrapped around his waist, Grant knew something with absolute clarity. He hadn't saved Jake. Jake had saved them all. Back at the penthouse that night, Lisa curled into her blankets while Jake sat near the window, the doll resting beside him. The stars above Manhattan seemed closer somehow, less distant, less cold. Grant leaned against the doorframe watching them. Lights out soon, he called gently. Okay, Daddy. Lisa yawned. Jake looked over, smiling. Night. Grant smiled back. Good night, kiddo. He turned out the lights. And as the city outside sparkled in silence, the apartment behind the glass held something rarer than diamonds or stocks or towers that touched the sky. It was a beautiful Friday in the penthouse filled with soft laughter and the warmth of string lights hanging from the ceiling. The dining table had been transformed into a party kingdom, pink and gold streamers, plates piled high with cupcakes, a cheerfully bubbling chocolate fountain in the corner. 7 candles stood tall on a multi-layered vanilla cake in the center, tilted slightly by the weight of the frosting and bearing the words, "Happy 7th birthday, Lisa." She stood at the heart of the celebration wearing a white dress speckled with tiny stars and a glittery crown that kept slipping sideways on her head. Her cheeks glowed with excitement as friends from school surrounded her with cards and balloons. But she kept glancing toward one person more than anyone else, Jake. He stood a little apart, leaning by the window in a button-up shirt that still felt slightly too stiff, but made him look older than 9. His hair was combed, his smile was quiet, and in his arms he held a neatly wrapped gift box, one that Grant had helped him prepare days ago. Lisa ran over to him, her crown bouncing. "Come on, Jake. You haven't had cake yet. I'm waiting for the birthday girl," he replied with a shrug. She took his hand without asking and pulled him toward the cake table past a group of kids shouting about party games and a magician who'd made a bunny appear an hour ago. As they passed the sofa, Grant stepped into view, holding something behind his back. Lisa's eyes lit up. "Daddy, you said no more surprises," I lied, Grant said with a grin. "This one's from me. And Mommy." Her face softened at the mention of her mother. Grant stepped forward and slowly revealed the gift, a brand new porcelain doll, dressed in soft pink satin with golden curls and a tiny heart stitched over her chest. Lisa gasped. "She's beautiful," she whispered, reaching for it gently. "What's her name?" "That's up to you," Grant said softly. "But I thought maybe it was time for you to have a new one." Lisa took the doll into her arms and held it against her cheek, but then she turned, slightly eyes drifting to the edge of the room where her old doll rested in a glass case placed beside a framed photo of her mother. Her mother's gift. The one that had seen her through grief, through fear, through the moment she almost vanished forever. She stepped toward it and opened the case carefully. With one doll in each arm, she turned back to Jake. "You can hold her again," she said. "Just like that night." Jake stepped forward a little stunned. "Lisa, it's your birthday. That's your special." She shook her head. "You're the reason I'm here, the reason I get to be 7. And then she added in a whisper only he could hear, "You're the best gift Mommy ever gave me." Jake looked at her, the weight of her words crashing softly through his chest. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just hugged her, one arm around her shoulder, the doll pressed between them. Across the room, Grant watched the moment unfold with glassy eyes. He hadn't expected to cry on, but the sight of his daughter, the light of his life, standing beside the boy who had saved her, wrapped in the warmth of a family that had been forged through chaos and courage. It overwhelmed him. A gentle touch on his arm pulled him back. One of the guests, a longtime friend of Grant's, smiled. "You okay?" Grant nodded, wiping a tear that slid down without permission. "Yeah, just watching fate finish what it started." The guest looked confused but said nothing. Grant turned back toward the children. Jake now sat beside Lisa on the floor, the 2 dolls lined up between them like sentinels. Lisa was showing Jake how to braid the new doll's hair while still cradling the old one in her lap. The room was filled with laughter, chatter, music, but they were in their own little world. Peaceful. Whole. Later that night, after the last balloon had deflated and the final thank you card was packed away, Grant tucked Lisa into bed. Her crown had been replaced with a soft headband, and the new doll rested beside her on the pillow, but she still clutched the old one in her arms. "You still love her best, don't you?" he asked quietly. Lisa nodded sleepily. "She kept me safe." Grant kissed her forehead. "You're safe now, sweetheart. And you made someone else feel safe too." As he turned off the light, Lisa murmured, "Don't forget to check on Jake." "I already did," Grant whispered with a smile. In the guest room, no longer called that by anyone, Jake was curled under the covers, one arm behind his head, the other resting on a book Lisa had lent him about space travel. On the shelf above his bed, both dolls now sat side by side watching over the boy who had once watched over the world alone. The legal documents were signed, the guardianship official, the court date for full adoption set. But long before the ink had dried, Jake had already become a part of them. Not because he had saved Lisa or because he had made headlines, but because he had given them all something they didn't know they were missing: hope and a new beginning. And so the story came full circle, not with fireworks or endings, but with a birthday, a doll, and a whisper that carried more truth than 1,000 speeches. "You're the best gift Mommy ever gave me." And in that moment, Grant Ellison knew they weren't broken people who had rescued each other. They were a family, found, forged, and finally forever. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.